Oh, that worked. Yeah. Thank you all for being here at the regularly scheduled meeting of the Granville Exempted Village Schools Board of Education. Would you please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Before we take the roll, since it came first on the agenda, I would like to welcome everyone here tonight. Some of you were here earlier at our 5 o'clock meeting where we asked the community to come in and speak with us and share thoughts and ideas with respect to school funding. I was very encouraged by that meeting. I know we all were very pleased with the turnout. We would like to continue to engage in that process. And what we can pledge to you is that we are open to ideas and that we are committed to moving forward and finding ways to maintain the excellence in our schools and fund them in a rational manner, which is, as folks have pointed out, not always easy given our state funding structure, but we're going to keep our commitment to doing that. The other thing I want to note tonight, we have a relatively new member of the board, Fred Wolf, who was appointed just in time for all this excitement in the board committees. As some of you know, there was a legal challenge that was filed locally in the courts, challenging the process by which the board engaged in selecting and appointing Mr. Wolf to fill out the unexpired term on the board. We're gratified that the court recently ruled in favor of the Board of Education and verified or validated that we had indeed followed the appropriate, correct, and transparent process required under the law. And so Mr. Wolf is now fully committed. There's no backing out now. But I wanted to make sure to note that, and we're grateful that he stepped up in a really significant way, volunteered a countless number of hours already, even under that cloud. And so I would like to once again welcome Mr. Wolf. Thank you. As a corollary to that, we also want to thank the Ohio School Boards Association's Legal Assistance Fund because they contributed $5,000 to help offset some of the legal costs that we incurred in defending that lawsuit. And that's not an insignificant amount of money. Certainly we are mindful of how we spend each and every dollar in this community and in the school district. And so we're extremely gratified by the actions of the Ohio School Board Association and the Legal Defense Fund to help offset some of the costs that we incurred in defending that lawsuit. Thank you to those folks. With that, Mr. Sobel, if you would take the roll, please.
Mr. Jennings.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Dr. Corman.
Here.
Ms. Deeds.
Here.
Mr. Wolf.
Here.
Commendations.
So for you people that are new to board meetings, we typically get up and commend some of our students or teachers or faculty for tremendous work. So tonight is a great representation of the arts. So I am honored to honor our band, orchestra, and choir tonight. So every year, performances by our band, choirs, and orchestras seem to get better. Our student musicians showcased their skill in several OMEA contests and once again came home with top ratings. Qualifying for state contests this year and earning superior ratings this year were all four choirs, men's, women's, and freshman choruses and symphonic choir, and both symphonic and concert bands and orchestra. What a fine achievement by our musicians and their directors. We invite our officers from the band, choirs, and orchestras and their directors here to represent literally hundreds involved in these incredible programs. But before you get up, one of the things that I truly believe is a source of pride for this community and this school district is the balance between academics, athletics, and the arts. And in many communities, that's not a level playing field or a balanced playing field. In this community, it is. And our students pop from one field to the stage to, you know, another environment, and really showcase what tremendous talent that they have. And so I guess that's my way of saying they're very multi-talented, and we appreciate the fact that they dedicate the amount of time, energy, and effort to perform and learn their craft that they do. So let's have our student representatives from Symphonic Band President Hayden Fry, Concert Band President Tanner Mall, Symphony and Chamber Orchestras Emily Cromwell, Mary Kate Hill, Rafi DeGennaro, Bjorn Ludwig, and Matthias Young, Prelude Orchestra Sabrina Craig and Annabelle Foster, Symphonic Choir men and women's chorus officers Nathan Dement, Rick Duffus, Gabriella Schneid, Kate Plogger, Joey Palmier, and Kieran Sutliff. And then freshman women's choir president Hannah Rockwell. Have I forgotten anyone? All right, let's have you guys come up right now. You can start singing now. Okay, that, I don't know how we're gonna get this picture done, but
Squish.
right down the line.
I think so.
Okay, and where are the directors? Okay, come on.
Come on down.
I don't know how much time they dedicate, but they dedicate unbelievable amounts of time and energy to help these young students perform. So, smile and look down the road. Got it? Excellent. Thank you very much, and congratulations. The next group that I'd like to highlight, I'm going to not bring up the theater department yet. I'm going to end with them. But the Science Olympiad team at GMS placed third in Central Ohio Regional Tournament and moved on to compete at this Ohio Science Olympiad State Tournament last month, where they placed 19th out of 40 teams, an improvement of 13 places from last year. The team also had 4 top 10 finishes in anatomy, fast facts, mystery architecture, and towers. And representing the team tonight are Isabella and Julian Rogers, Joey McAleer, thank you, and Olivia Liberty. And congratulations to everyone, and their advisor, Josh Grishow, come on up. All right, this one's easier. Let's move in
Yeah, there
closer.
we
So just another final remark about that team. I think it's great that our social studies teacher, Josh Grishow, is actually the Science Olympiad advisor and wanted and brought it here. It really cultivated the program from the ground up. So thank you very much, Josh. Okay, finally, the GHS Theater program has had a busy and successful year. 3 well-attended productions include John Lennon and Me, Check Please, and Annie. Students attend the Ohio Thespian Conference and won first place in the Techie Challenge. Those involved in the All Ohio show were Lisa Ball, Kelsey Patel, Kayla Braden, and Claire Duncan. Representing all the students who contributed to this year's success on stage and at the conference were David Braden and Kayla Braden, Rose Duffus, Claire Duncan, Sydney Flora, and Emma Jernigan. Come on up with your directors, Sarah Sharp, Stephanie Stanton, and Tim Stanton. Please come on. I have to tell you, Rick is graduating, but every time I have a meeting or a presentation, he sets up sound for me, and many of these students have done that, and they stay late, they come back. So, Rick, I appreciate all of your time and effort. And Sarah, thank you for choosing selections that didn't give me even more gray hair.
You're welcome for that this year.
Yes. So that concludes our commendations for tonight. And I know many people have a lot of places to go, so feel free to leave at this time. However, you may want to stick around because we have Kate Guiney who's going to share her Global Scholars Project with the board. And it won't take more than what? How many minutes? 4 or 5 minutes. So you might want to stick around just for that because it's fantastic. I've heard it already. So that concludes our commendations.
All right.
Kate?
Thank you. Kate, podium is yours.
My name is Kate Guiney. I am a senior at the high school, and I am also a global scholar. 2 years ago, one of my closest friends began struggling with numerous mental health issues. They stopped all of their extracurricular activities and soon stopped coming to school altogether. Depression and anxiety completely destroyed my best friend's life. Not only have these issues affected my own community, but people struggle with mental health disorders around the world. For example, suicide is the leading cause of death in Japan from the ages of 10 to 19. 4 years ago, I enrolled in the Global Scholars Program at the high school. As it was just starting, I wasn't completely sure what all it would entail, but I was excited to be given an opportunity to think globally as a high schooler. The first 2 years required a great deal of work, but I was able to learn a lot about other cultures. My junior year, however, the program took all of its level 3 students and told them to create and implement some sort of service project. There were few guidelines except to work on something that you are truly passionate about, and it had to address an issue that has a global impact. When starting to research and brainstorm my Global Scholars Project, I knew immediately that I wanted to address mental health in some form. After many failed attempts to settle on one specific topic, I eventually chose to focus on suicide prevention. This was in part inspired by my interest in advocating for the LGBTQ+ community. In a national study, 40% of transgender adults admitted to have attempted suicide in their lifetime, 92% of these under the age of 25. While this is a massive issue for the LGBTQ+ community, other students are in no way immune, as our own high school's own anonymous survey proved just last year. I'm sure I don't need to remind you of the statistics, but it is impossible to stand idly by when nearly 1 in every 5 students of last year's graduating class had seriously considered suicide within the previous year. Over the past 2 years, I have researched and developed a suicide prevention policy based on a model that was created by 5 national organizations, all dedicated to improving the mental health of teenagers. This policy is focused on helping students' mental health at all school levels, and it includes 3 sections dedicated to suicide prevention. The first component is appointing a prevention coordinator at the district level and each school level who would be responsible for all suicide prevention and policy-related subjects at that level. The second component is annual staff training on various prevention-related subjects such as risk factors, warning signs, and response procedures.
So there is strength in doing that, and I have to tell you, your leadership on that subcommittee was phenomenal. And most adults would struggle to do what you did, and you did it in a way that really brought life to that issue, and it was a very balanced approach, so thank you. Appreciate it.
Kate, the board would echo those comments. We're all committed to the well-being effort with a very high level of focus and energy devoted to it. And what you've done is incredible, and what you will do in your next few years is even more incredible. We know that. So thank you for what you've done. Let's move to
So
chapter.
now, if people want to leave after Kate, I held people hostage for you, Kate, but if they want to leave now, Mr. Sobel's going to present the 5-year forecast.
Oh, I thought you were inviting me to leave.
No. It is limited. See you, Jenny.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phoenix.
Mr. Sobel can certainly clear a room.
Let's start with that.
Yeah. Mike, please.
As Mike is getting set up, I will tee him up. According to law, Mike has to present a 5-year forecast 2 times a year, in October and May. It shouldn't be lost on you that we have a 5-year projection that we are required to do, but it's based off of a 2-year budget at the state level. So it's a little bit more of looking at our assumptions and developing a long-range forecast for the community. So Mike, I think I've teed you up.
Thank you.
You're ready to go?
So, as Jeff said, we're required to do this 2 times a year in May and October. A couple things to note about this. One is that in the forecast, we are not allowed to include any levies that have not been approved by the voters. So you will see no mention of here of what we may or may not do in November. That is not allowed to be included anyway, so it is not there. The other thing that the board does do in May is it reviews the capital budget as well as the operating budget. There is no formal requirement for that, but the board does do that. And so we will take a quick look at the capital budget. The board does not act on the capital budget other than in the appropriations for the upcoming year. So this is the forecast. Looking at it currently and looking at it back in October, this does incorporate the income or the impact of the reduction in force that the board is planning. That and the insurance changes that were made as part of the negotiations are the big differences in where the forecast is right now and where it was back in October. What you can see, and you have to be a little careful, because of the federal law change with deductibility of property taxes, we had taxpayers pay about $600,000 of property taxes early before January 1st of this year to take advantage of the deductibility, which pulled the money forward a year, which distorts the first 2 years of it. So, but if you take a look, and you really need to look at fiscal 19 to fiscal 19, the current fund balance is expected to be about $700,000 higher than it was in October. We are still spending more than we are taking in, but in reality, these two numbers here, if not for the $600,000 that was pulled forward, would have been switched around. And so, in reality, this year, we're spending much more like it was back in October, where we're more like $650,000 more than we're taking in. With the reduction in force and the other changes that are being proposed, next year, if it were not for that $600,000 swap, would have been about a flat spending with revenues. You can see going forward, we are still expecting to spend more than we're taking in each year. The cash balance at the end of the 5 years is obviously significantly better than it was back in October, again, because of the cumulative effect of the reduction in force and the long-term impact of the insurance changes.
Mike, can you, before you move on,
Yeah.
can you just highlight the revenue surplus or deficit versus the ending cash balance, and a little bit about that cash balance and what that point in time is?
Yeah,
You're going to talk about it later, but
next slide. But the red in the second line from the bottom, that is our operating income, essentially net operating income for the year. If you look at it in a business sense, that is our spending, again, each year in excess of the amount of money that we are taking in revenue for that year. The bottom line in each case is the cash that we have on hand on June 30th of each year. So it's the cash that is on hand on that one day that we are measured by the state. The issue, and this is the monthly cash flow, and you can see the number here, in the June number, the $4.3 million that we saw in the previous graph. But that is not our low point of the year as far as cash. Because we are so heavily dependent on property taxes for probably 75% of our revenue, most of our revenue comes in 4 months during the year. It comes in July and August, and then in February and March. When we get to the end of January, before we start getting our new property taxes, our cash balances are about $3 million lower than they are on June 30th. And that's always a number that we need to keep in mind, because if we get to a point like we saw in the previous graph, where we have $1.5 million left on June 30th, well, think about it. If there's a $3 million swing, between June 30th and then the following January 31st. On January 31st, we are essentially at a negative cash situation. And so you need to look at the cash more than at just one point in time. The budget reductions and changes that we are doing, about $300,000 of salary changes, about $50,000 of health insurance changes. We are proposing moving the convenience fee from pay for it. Right, the last few years, the board has been absorbing that. We are going to move the convenience fee back onto the parents and the users. And so those in total, you see about $400,000 of change, 442, it goes over 2 years because of timing. We are also looking, we will not be proposing tonight, more likely we'll be proposing at the June meeting a pay to participate. We are still working on sizing that and how that will look. We're anticipating it will raise about $175,000 a year above what we are currently getting from the high school and middle school activity fees. This is the capital budget, and it's kind of a simplified version just for next year. And it's actually a capital budget had the levy passed and a capital budget as we are now proposing. Because the levy proposal included an attempt to fix some of our capital needs, we are actually going to spend considerably less than we would have had the levy passed on our capital needs. All of the lines that are highlighted in red are where we have made reductions beyond what we would have previously done. Big ones being, you see, we were planning on $115,000 of flooring replacements as those are starting to wear out. We're now projecting not to spend anything on flooring changes this year. You see we did the same with furniture. We have a couple of vehicles that are in need of replacement. We're only going to replace one of them rather than two of them. Any textbook purchases that we were planning, we are not going to do. And then also about a $100,000 reduction in some of our computer replacements. Not the direct classroom like the Chromebook, but other parts of our technology. And so those are all changes that we had to make relative to what we would have been spending because the levy did not pass. Taking a look at, and again, just a comparison of the current year from where we were in October to right now. The revenue side, everything is very close to where it was in October, with the exception of the real property taxes, again reflecting the $600,000 that was received this year that we weren't expecting to receive until next year. On the spending side, there really is not much difference between where we were in October and where we are right now. There's a couple lines where we're spending a little more than we're anticipating. There's a few we're spending a little bit less. These are well within budgeting tolerances as far as where we are. Enrollment. Enrollment is important in our aid from the state and also for our staffing. You can take a look. We are right now at 2,480 students across the district. Last year we finished at 2,455. So we are up 25 kids from where we were last year. The important thing to notice is when we had this chart in October, this number, instead of being plus 25, was minus 3. We have gained 28 students across the district since the October forecast. And so you see almost every year we are projecting increases in enrollment all but 1 year. The only year we are not is out in the 2021 school year, and that's because we have going out from the year before probably the largest class that we have ever had, 232 kids. And so, and we're actually expecting, based on birth data, one of our smaller kindergarten classes that we've had over the last 5 years with only 142. And so we're going to lose 90 kids just from that with our move-ins, which are generally net positive. don't quite get us back to where we were the prior year. But other than that, we're projecting by the end of the 5-year period that we will have about 65 more kids in the district than we have right now. Take a look at the sources of our revenue, take a look at it now and kind of where we're projecting. If you look at the real estate plus the property tax allocation, which comes from the state but is based on real estate, so essentially 70% of the revenue that we get is from real property taxpayers. We get a little bit of what's up there is public utility property is a little bit, and that is actually growing a little. That's been growing at a pretty rapid rate. That's one area where we do get revenue when it grows, because there's no reduction in rates on that. The rest of it's state aid. It's listed two different, it's unrestricted, 23% of our total budget. We're expecting that to drop to 22%. I'll show that here in just a minute as to why we are losing revenue. If you take a look at the property tax, last year, 2017, was a reappraisal year in Lincoln County. Across the district, our residential rate values went up by 14%. Our ag values, which work in with residential to determine tax rates, actually went down a little bit because of some changes in state law. But the agricultural part of that is only about 5%, so it doesn't have much impact on the overall. But even with that 14% increase in residential values, and that represents a 3-year growth. It's because its property is reassessed every 3 years. We got about a 1.5% growth in property tax revenue. So essentially a 0.5% per year for 3 years. Obviously not keeping up with the rate of inflation in what is our largest revenue source. At the state level, a little bit about the state funding formula. With the way the formula works, we can have one of 3 outcomes with the funding formula. We can be formula funded, we can be capped in our funding, or we can be guaranteed in our funding. And you will see over this 6-year period, we managed to hit all of them at least once. So we have been bouncing all over the place. This year, we actually started being as a formula funded district, meaning what the formula said we should get is what we got. However, when we added 28 students from the beginning of the year to now, it took us off the formula and we are now capped. And you see we're capped by about 23 students. So what that means is the first 5 or 6 students that we added from where we started the year, we got additional revenue from the state. The last 23 kids that we've added, we have gotten no additional money from the state. Next year, we're anticipating actually being formula funded without much chance of reaching either the cap or the guarantee. Again, we're projecting we'd have to add 54 kids above what we're already forecasting as for growth to get as far as the cap. So essentially, the good news out of that means that for each additional student we get above what we're projecting, we're going to get an additional about $2,000 from the state for each kid. Now that also means if we end up with fewer kids than we're projecting, we will get $2,000 less for each one each one we don't get that we forecasted that we will. When we get out to the 2020, you see we are a guarantee district. That is primarily driven by the 14% increase in our residential values that occurred last year. That is making us, in the eyes of the state formula, much wealthier relative to all the other districts in the state. And so now what it says is if you calculate what the formula says we should get, it's actually less than we got in the year before. And what we're assuming the guarantee has generally been is you're guaranteed at least the amount you got the year before. And so what we're saying is based on our current projections, we would have to add an additional 35 students above where we're projecting to be just to get off the guarantee. So if you think what that means is, based on the funding level we're projecting for that year, the first 35 students above our current projection that we had, we will get no additional money from the state, where essentially the state is telling us, now you're already funded for that. And so once you get past 35, then we would start, if we got past 35, we would start getting additional money. And you can see the last 2 years, we're still on the guarantee, but much closer to the formula.
Mike, what is the, can you share the state-based funding amount
Yeah.
versus what we received?
The base state funding amount this year is $6,010. You see, we have a state share index this year of about 33%. So in essence, of the $6,000, and that's a kind of a base cost when you're talking about students who don't have any kind of special needs, funding kids who don't have disabilities, aren't gifted, aren't economically disadvantaged. The state is saying it should cost $6,000 to educate each one of those kids. They give us $2,000 of that $6,000. The other $4,000 is assumed to come from our local taxpayers.
The other comment that I would make is from a risk standpoint, every gubernatorial candidate that I've talked with has said that they don't like guarantees and that they're trying to eliminate the guarantee to get people more to the formula funded level. So that is a risk for potential loss of revenue in
It
this
is,
forecast.
it is, luckily, we're not real far onto the guarantee, so
Correct.
it is not a huge risk for us like it may be for some other districts. On the expenditure side of the budget, if you look upward salaries and benefits, we spend 80% of our operating budget on salaries and benefits. Over the next few years, the salaries is supposed to actually expected to go up a little bit, the benefits down. That's because of the healthcare changes that we made as part of the last negotiated agreement. The other big area is purchase services. That's 14% of our budget, expected to be 15. That is actually the fastest growing line item in our budget, and most of that is spending that is beyond any control that we have. It's most of the biggest portion of that is state mandated spending. That basically the state tells us what we have to spend, and we spend it. If you take a look at our expenditures going backwards, over the last 5-year period, we spent about our expenditures went up by an average of about 3% a year. You can see going forward, projecting about 3.3%. The two circle numbers in there for next year, the slow growth in salaries is a direct relation to the reductions in staff that we are doing. The benefit, the negative 6% is a combination of the reductions plus the change in the healthcare from the negotiated agreement. We are expecting our healthcare premiums to go down in fiscal year 19 because of the changes that we made back last spring. Final thoughts. Our overall fiscal challenges have not changed. They've just kind of been pushed out 1 year because of the reductions that we have made and the projected pay to participate that we're anticipating doing. And we still have the same problem we expressed throughout the campaign, is that our capital needs cannot be funded at the level of additional revenue, without additional revenue at the levels of revenue that we have right now. So with that, I will stop if you have questions.
Mike, on your, I think maybe in your third slide, your line item capital expenditure slide, that one. Oops.
Yeah.
So I know we've talked about the fact that with the age of the buildings, we're going to start undertaking significantly greater repairs, and I know in the coming year we'll need to replace the fire suppression sprinkler system within the high school and middle school, which is going to be north of 300,000, maybe 350,000. Is that what's in the mechanical line item up there?
The line item for mechanicals, yeah, the only thing we are able to do this year in mechanicals is the $350,000 for the sprinkler system.
So if we have a boiler issue, if we have any other issue, we'll have to adjust this.
We have to either adjust Yeah, we budget $50,000 of contingency. That probably is not gonna cover a boiler. It will cover some of our, what that really is looking to cover is, like last year, one of our snow plows, I think caught fire, didn't it?
Yeah, well,
And-
that was a lawnmower.
That was a lawnmower. I knew something caught fire last year. And we had to obviously we had to replace that. And so that is what we have the contingency money for, is for things like that. Unfortunately, that will not cover a boiler or a whole air conditioning unit. If something like that were to happen, we'd have to do some combination of deferring out of other things or digging into, we try and keep a cash reserve, not a huge cash reserve, but a cash reserve in case we have some major project that we have to do something with, so that we can do that.
Okay.
And Mr. Janice, the one thing that I would highlight, so we had $350,000 allocated for replacement of mechanicals.
Right.
Our HVAC system, our chillers, all of those require annual upgrade. And so we have them on that 20-year plan.
Right.
So we are deferring maintenance on $350,000 of those units that needed to be replaced according to that plan. So those are getting pushed because of that critical life safety issue.
Right, thank you for pointing that out.
Yep.
And then, Mike, and I hate to make you go forward again, but your last or second to last slide, right there.
This one? Whoops.
Oh, not that one,
Not that one.
previous one, all right. So the fiscal year 18, total expenditures were up 5.22%.
Yes.
Big line items there were salaries and benefits. Salaries under the new 3-year contract that we negotiated.
Right.
Benefits up primarily because we had to advance fund, I believe.
Yes,
the
there's some
HSA
that was
account.
from the advanced funding of the HSA. The salaries, part of why that was up so much is we did add, for this year, we added,
Global language.
global language, we added 2 global language positions, and a kindergarten position
Mhm.
to meet enrollment. So that's part of what's driving the 5.63% is several new positions that we had to add.
So that was outsized growth in 1 year that hasn't been typical over the last 5.
Correct.
Okay. And we expect that the benefits will be reduced. I think you mentioned the benefits will be reduced significantly going forward based upon the
Correct.
change in the insurance.
Correct, we're
health
starting at a
insurance
much
plan.
lower base. There's a hope that with that, some of the high increases that we have gotten in the past, maybe will not be as high as, as everybody, all of us try and change our behavior and how we use healthcare to meet, the new system.
Okay, thank you.
And, that, since it was a topic of conversation in the funding forum, and I didn't elaborate at that time, but for this audience, we made a significant change in our benefit structure in cooperation with the association because everybody recognizes that growing at 12% is not sustainable. And so, when we have a committee formed at looking at insurance benefits, that is a joint administration association committee to look at how to best manage taxpayers' dollars and still provide benefits that are similar to what people have had in the past. But this has been a dramatic shift away from a public sector model, which is a PPO model, to a more private sector model of a high deductible HSA plan, with the intent to cost share moving forward, and that initial lowering of the premium would allow us to actually provide a base salary increase through that last round of negotiations. So that we talk about that here. I don't know that message gets out very often to one, give credit to the association and the teachers for their willingness to adjust, knowing that it's not a sustainable level, and that the board is acting in a prudent fashion with taxpayer dollars. And I wish I had more of a mechanism to communicate those messages that people would actually hear and understand. But I think that is a significant change that was made in healthcare benefits.
I think you raise a good point, which is that we have been, the board and the administration have been very, very focused over the last 7 or 8 years, at least to my recollection, and perhaps longer, on controlling costs that we could control. And you raise a good point, because there are several things we can't control. We can't control the growth, the astronomic growth in health insurance costs. And we can't control the significant and material growth in purchase services, as Mike indicated. I think I looked at our 5-year history of audited financial reports, and our purchase services have increased 58% over 5 years. Those are unfunded mandates that come to us, that the services that we provide, and we provide them willingly and we provide them expertly. But we can't control that. It's not something we can elect, and it's certainly not something for which we receive funding. So the two greatest areas of exposure for us, or risk to our budget, are in things that we have a hard time controlling. And I think we've moved the needle significantly in controlling, going forward, our health insurance costs. And you're exactly right. It wouldn't happen without the collaboration and goodwill of the staff. And I commend everyone on the staff for recognizing that, the association for negotiating that. We have, I think, the greatest teachers around, and we'd like to treat them as such. We have a limited amount of funds, and so we've tried to do our best to be able to compensate fairly in a tight budget formula, tight budget structure, and that includes trying to put together a benefits plan which is fair, which is reliable for folks, but also controls our costs going forward, and that's significant. We've taken huge steps in order to control that cost going forward.
Mike, could you talk a little bit about our forecast student-teacher ratio and how we adjust staff in the forecast to enrollment and so forth? I know in the past we've been, vigilant about making sure we, reduce or change staff grade levels and so forth to meet changing enrollment. With the proposed upcoming reduction in force, I know we're kind of at an uncomfortable level in my perspective on student-teacher ratio. Could you talk about student-teacher ratio and forecast and how that cranks out?
What we generally try to do is maintain student-teacher ratios at kindergarten 20 to 22 to 1, first to third grade probably in a 21 to 23 to 1 range, fourth through sixth grade in a 24 to 26 range. And that's where we primarily focus, is on the class sizes in K6. When we were going through the period where our enrollment was declining, we were adjusting to that. We were having teachers move around. When small classes were coming through, we, instead of replacing a couple times when we had teachers retire or leave, we reassigned to let them go down, to let those numbers go down to maintain the pupil-teacher ratios. Over the last 3-4 years, that's reversed. Class enrollment has gone up. Just over the last 4 years in the elementary school, we have 18% more kids than we had 4 years ago in grades K through 3. And we have adjusted our staff to meet that, to keep our ratios in line. In the intermediate school, we've actually gone down a little bit, and we did adjust down a position as one of our smaller classes was coming through. We're adjusting down in the intermediate school. With the reductions in force, had the levy passed, we probably would have hired a 5th grade teacher and a 3rd grade teacher to meet the enrollment demands in those 2 grades. We are using some of the changes that we're doing in response to the levy failure, where we're proposing ending the ACE-based program at the elementary school and moving that teacher back to the 5th grade, so that, because it impacts a larger number of teachers. And also, we think at this point we're only going to need 3 half-day classes of kindergarten next year. We may get a run in the summer that we're not expecting, with barring an unusual run over the summer. And so we will take a kindergarten teacher, which we have for full-time, and split that position and have her help in third grade to ease some of the class size issues that we're expecting in third grade next year.
Okay. And the board hasn't voted on fees specifically in terms of pay to participate and others and so forth. How are fees incorporated that we might vote on in the future in the forecast?
The fees are incorporated where you'll see the fee increases. I don't have a good chart here. Essentially, the fees are part of all of the revenue. And so the pay to participate fees would go into the all of the revenue. They stay at about 3% of revenue because, we're looking at $175,000 in a $30 million budget. $175,000 is a small amount of money. And so you're not seeing it in the percentages, but you would see it in the growth of revenue. If we're showing you the actual dollars and the growth of revenue, which I don't have that chart in here, you would see it in there.
Okay.
So you had talked about, back to the health insurance for just a second, a 10 to 12% increase in premiums per year, right? Not necessarily cost to the district. And I'm wondering, how does that compare to other districts? And what do we yet have a sense of what our new health insurance plan, how that rate of increase will change?
Because the plan is now all of 5 months old.
Right, we don't know yet, okay.
And we don't have even 5 months worth of data. We don't really have a good sense yet of how that will change going forward, and we don't even know for sure. The only thing we know for sure for next year as part of the negotiated agreement with Medical Mutual is that we have a 10% cap next year. So we know it can't go up more than 10%. We won't know probably until the fall, when we have more history,
Right.
Under the new plan, what those rates may be.
Okay. Do we know how it compares to other districts?
Yeah, I work with a lot of districts, and honestly, we have been seeing things all over the place at this point. There's a lot of places where they've been able to stay under control the last year or two, and we've seen a lot of districts getting double-digit increases this year. It's really, so much of it has to do with the experience and the usage, and that's a little hard to predict from district to district. But we have seen where it's been controlled in places. We have seen, districts that I've worked with, a lot of them have seen double-digit or are expecting double-digit increases coming up either July 1st or next January 1st.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you, Mike. We're now at the point in our agenda where we'll open the microphone to public comments. Anyone who would like to make a public comment, if you would please step up to the microphone, let us know your name and address, and feel free to make comments. We typically request that folks limit their comments to 3 to 5 minutes, but we would welcome anyone who would like to speak.
Good evening. My name is Don Charlton. I'm with the Granville Music Boosters. You need my address, is that right?
Yep.
1804 Carlisle Court, and that's in Newark.
Thank you.
I have 2 quick statements. They're about 30 seconds each. I'm going to read those with your permission. The first statement will explain the second statement. So the first statement is just an update about the Music Boosters. With a mission to foster music appreciation and create opportunities for our music students, kindergarten through 12th grade, the Granville Music Boosters has been a federally registered 501c3 nonprofit organization for 23 years now. Thanks to generous support from our parent and community booster members, supplemented by several annual fundraisers. We've provided uniforms and concert dress attire, equipment and supplies, auxiliary instructors, scholarships, and classroom support for Granville's music programs. While our parents have provided tremendous support to Music Boosters over the years, we also know many parents have children participating in multiple arts disciplines. So building on our success and encouraged by Granville School District Administration and Superintendent Jeff Brown, Granville Music Boosters is excited to team up with the theater and art departments to extend support to all fine arts in Granville schools. By adding art and theater to our group, we are confident parental involvement will continue to grow to better support all of our fine arts students as Granville Arts Boosters. So we have officially adopted the name Granville Arts Boosters.
Excellent.
If I have to pay a nickel for every time I say Granville Music Boosters. Okay, so having said that, getting on to the news of the levy's failure, we also understand that the GIS orchestra instructor is a position of concern. So the Granville Arts Boosters naturally is concerned about the future of the part-time GIS orchestra position for two key reasons. First reason, this is the position that is most directly linked to initially introducing and recruiting younger students to the orchestra program, basically 5th and 6th grade. Second reason is this position relieves orchestra music director Samantha Schnabel of what would otherwise be overwhelming responsibility. So given the importance of this part-time GIS employee position, the Arts Boosters has approved a motion to contribute up to $4,000 to the Granville schools for the upcoming school year, if the contribution can help the Granville schools provide the financial footing to retain the position. In addition, Arts Boosters will coordinate with the Granville Education Foundation, as well as an identified local benefactor, to fully fund this position for 1 year. I know we all agree that our orchestra program, as well as other music and fine arts programs, helps make Granville a truly premier school district. Thank you.
Thank you. Don, that's an extraordinarily generous gesture by the Arts Boosters, and we're enormously honored and pleased that the Arts Boosters have done that. It's a just tremendous effort to really backs up what I know that group believes in, and has put their time and their money into for a long period of time. So thank you, and please convey our thanks.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Hi, I am a Granville resident, along with my husband and 3 small children at 105 Carlingford Drive in Granville. I am also one of the 2 librarians that have been cut following the levy failure. And I wanted to come to you as a library advocate and as a Granville mom to make sure the few community members that are left, thank you for sticking with us, that you know what our children are losing with this cut. I think traditionally librarians are seen as keepers of books, and we just kind of sit at our desk and stamp away. But that couldn't be farther from the truth of what a modern librarian is these days. We instruct students both independently and collaboratively with the classroom teacher. We provide professional development and resources to our teachers. We serve on leadership committees. We write and win grants that benefit the students. We facilitate technology use by students and the staff. We provide technology support. And of course, we provide reading incentives. I think it's worth noting that I mentioned technology several times in there because, again, we're changing with the times. Technology is a big part of my degree. I'm an information science student, master's degree. It's also interesting to note that the gender gap in the technology industry is actually widening in modern times instead of closing, and that biggest gap in girls losing interest in technology happens between 13 and 17. So losing another technology advocate at the middle school and intermediate levels could be devastating to some of our daughters. But just more about librarians, there have been 34 studies over the past less than 20 years, statewide studies done nationwide, and they have all found positive correlations between successful schools and students performing well on standardized tests with having a highly qualified librarian in the building. And that might sound like, well, only high-achieving, high-earning districts can afford librarians, and that's not true either. That the gains that schools experience happen regardless of student demographics or the school's characteristics. And in fact, it actually has shown to benefit low-achieving or at-risk students the most, which we find to be a difficult demographic to see the gains. And librarians have been shown to help those students. To get more specific, librarians are aligned with the vision that Ohio sees for our education. They have recently adapted the Future Ready Schools framework, and a big part of the Future Ready Schools framework is having a Future Ready librarian to help. From the State Department of Education and the Future Ready Schools website, it says, as schools seek out to become future ready, it is necessary to identify and cultivate leadership beyond district and building leaders. School librarians lead, teach, and support their schools and or districts' future ready schools goals through their professional practice, programs, and spaces. More specifically, Granville has really pushed a project-based learning style. We had individuals from the Buck Institute in to train staff on how to properly deliver and successfully deliver project-based learning. And actually this month, the Buck Institute posted on their blog about how librarians help the PBL process blossom. They wrote, the school librarian is an authority on virtual information sources and have the expertise to conduct mini lessons of technology-related skills ranging from digital citizenship to graphic design. And speaking of which, because there are a couple students in here, as I was preparing all of this, I have to tell you, I Googled librarians. The first 9 results were for TNT's show, The Librarians. And I went to Ohio and used my rich, reliable sources and databases there. I got exactly what I needed, by the way. I think I'll lastly, we're really pushing here in Granville, learning for life. That's our new slogan. And I really like this quote by Connie Williams, who's a librarian at a California high school. And she said, the greatest impact we'll see on students as their libraries disappear is the disappearance of the community that a school library creates, not just as a learning environment, but as a place for students to come to meet up with each other, to create together, to find something good to read, and have someone there to talk to them about it. A place to be inspired and then motivated. Learning just doesn't happen in a classroom. It needs to be encouraged, supported, directed, and inspired. All those things happen in a strong school library. And rather than talk about the things that I've done, I asked a few students. Actually, another teacher asked some of her students what they thought about the library. And here are a few quotes from students. The library is a quiet, calm place to go when you feel stressed or upset. Mrs. Mackley greets you with a smile whenever you walk into the room. With no librarian, the library won't feel warm and welcoming anymore. Another student said, "The library is a great place to hang out or eat lunch. Mrs. Mackley's the best librarian ever, and her being laid off is a huge loss to GMS. Overall, the library was a fun place to chill and be yourself." I think we need a librarian because they do so much more than check in and out books. They make you feel welcome, and being in the library is the best place you could go. And then one student just wrote on this note card and handed it to me and said, "Never stop, ever." Which I'm not, and I appreciate the work that the administration has done as I do job seek in other districts and putting a good word in for me. So I appreciate that. I'm not trying to burn any bridges. Like I said, I am a Granville resident, but I think it's important. I wanted the community to know that there's much more to the library than just the books. Although, if you want any book suggestions, I will deliver for days. Yeah, I'm definitely going to miss coming to GMS every day next year. And I think some of the students will miss me there too. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay.
No, go ahead, go for it, I'll wait.
Dr. Fultner for 20 North Pearl Street. I actually wasn't going to speak today, but what I'm hearing, I guess brings me up here. One of the things that I realized as a conversation with you was that there was no non-regressive option for the levy apparently, and that's why we ended up with what we did. So I do worry about regressive taxes that are unfair to those less advantaged in society. And I also tend to think of education as a right. So I appreciate the difficulty of making the cuts that the board needs to make. I do not claim to be an expert. I don't know the details of the ins and outs, but one of the things that was missing for me in the treasurer's report was an articulation of the principles that motivate the cuts that are being made. And I'm disturbed the cuts target librarians and music teachers, because it seems to me that one of the guiding principles ought to be to maintain the educational mission of the district and to make that the most important thing. I also worry that a pay-to-play program is also regressive. What about the kids that come from families who cannot afford to pay? And so I wonder whether, in fact, it might seem more difficult at the moment, but whether it might not be more effective to just cut some extracurricular programs that might actually be popular and that might move people to be more accepting of any levy that the board might propose next time around. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Carol Copeworld, 4670 Grandview Road. Forgive me, I'm so nervous. If I could sing this to you, I wouldn't be painting right now. So, Don, my apologies, I had no idea you were going to announce that Music Boosters, i.e. Arts Boosters, was going to fund that position. And what I was going to say this evening was that when that proposal came to the Arts Boosters meeting, I was furious. To think that we are now going to start looking at our boosters to pay for educators infuriates me. And I want to know if we're going to start doing that and expecting that, then is the athletic boosters going to suddenly start paying a portion of the athletic director's salary? Because teachers are more important than anything, and that's what this district ought to be about. Educators and educators first. So there is a downside to the fact that the music boosters, i.e. Arts Boosters, has decided to be generous. And that is that the proposal to accept, to fund stands for the steel drums was not accepted. That was only $9,000, and that was turned down. And frankly, Mr. Crown hasn't asked for anything for the steel drums for a long time. And that may seem like a small thing, but if you're going to fund something here, you can also fund something else. And when people, myself included, give money to the Arts Arts Boosters, what used to be the Music Boosters, I'm pretty certain they didn't think they were having to fund teachers' salaries. Teachers' salaries should come first. Teachers should come first. If we have to cut some, if we have to cut some expensive administration, then we have to cut some of that expensive administration. Teachers actually spend day in, day out with the students first.
Anyone else with a comment?
Hello, Guy Manos, 159 Class Lane in Granville, Ohio. First off, I've worked with the schools for quite a while, indirectly through the levies, and I just read the paper, and I don't think anybody mentioned it. Mr. Sobel just won an award recognized, so I want to congratulate you, because if there's kids here, I'm sorry about to say it, but you know, that job is trying to make chicken salad out of chicken shit. You have to do a lot of stuff.
Change your job description.
Easy cuts. You know, everybody has their wants and needs, and that's the first thing you learn. And then you learn, as you dig into it, there are mandates that say you have to spend stuff on money that you may not necessarily want to spend money on, but you have to by the state. The librarians, the music teachers, the pay to play, those are the easy cuts. And that's the reason is there's nobody directly. There's no class that loses their favorite teacher when it's a librarian. You may have a favorite librarian, but you don't lose somebody. There's not a group that's going to support that librarian. I don't know the librarian, by the way, just so you know that. But I do think the hard cuts are what needs to be addressed. And the only room we really have is in personnel. And I heard earlier, we have 2 global language teachers. Did I hear somebody say it was a mandated position?
No.
Okay. My concern is that we have somebody who impacts, people who impact hundreds of students on a daily basis, and that's your librarians. And you have teachers that are being hired for a small group of individuals that may be able to make those personnel cuts instead. And that's the global language teachers. You got the 2 literary coaches. I think we need to look at the hard cuts, the ones that are driven by a small group of parents who have been impacted in the last 20 years I've been involved with schools. So I think we need to look at taking away what I call take away the no's, because you always have a small group of people who are going to vote yes to the levy no matter what. You have a small group of people who are always going to vote no for the levy no matter what. You have to change those people in between, and that's roughly around 60% of the population. And you have to take away their reasons to say no. And if they see making the hard cuts, not the easy ones, because the easy ones are next is probably going to be busing. Why? Because you get parents in an uproar that you're having to rearrange their schedule. Pay to play, they'll work that out. The boosters are probably going to have to step up like they did last time we had pay to play. So it's the hard cuts that you have to show the community you're willing to make, so that you take away those no's and turn them into yeses. So that's my speech. I think the shortest one here, but like I said that's if I would give advice, it's start turning those no's into yeses.
Thank you.
Mine's gonna be shorter.
Oh, good.
Yes. My name is Letitia Abram. I live at 2680 Fairfield Union Road, Lancaster, Ohio, for maybe another month. I just want to clarify some things. As the librarian at GIS, I teach 6 classes a day and see every student in the building on a 5-day rotation. So it is a class losing your teacher. And because since it seemed like there was confusion about that, I just want to briefly explain what I teach. In 4th grade, I teach primarily how to find good resources, because they start the research process in 4th grade. And so we look at a lot of nonfiction and learn how to find information in nonfiction sources and learn how to find good nonfiction sources. In 5th grade, I focus on online sources. I'm the teacher that not ready, to surf the web as well as my fifth graders can by the end of the year, because they didn't have that instruction when they were in school. And so these adults that are surfing the web or trying to find information on the web can learn a lot from my fifth graders, because I focus on that a lot in fifth grade. And then in sixth grade, I go above that and teach them how to present information. And I often sit in meetings like tonight, and I had like ideas for our treasurer about how to present better charts, because it's really hard to see them. But I teach all the sixth graders how to make better presentations, and not just in PowerPoint, but how to save them as usable files that can be put into any kind of program. But I also teach the sixth graders, and not because anybody here at Granville told me to, but because my sister and my brother-in-law teach at Michigan State University. And they have every year that they have taught, every semester that they have taught, they have sat in hearings afterwards with students who have committed plagiarism or broke copyright law. And so I teach our sixth graders about plagiarism, and I teach our sixth graders about copyright law. And when we're in a project-based learning environment like Granville has decided to be, they have to be able to present information in a public way and not be exposing themselves to the types of consequences that come with breaking copyright laws and plagiarizing. So that's just a quick summary. Thank you for your time. I will miss my classes. It's a tough schedule to teach 6 classes a day and to maintain a 12,000 book library collection. But I'm hoping that there's some thought put into how to maintain that when I'm gone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nick Maxwell. I live at 124 Fairfax Court. Didn't really plan on speaking, but I figured the student perspective should be one that's heard in this. I will be a part of Granville High School for the next 3 days and 3 days only. When I think about my time at Granville, it's the teachers and the other students that I've interacted with in the experience. So libraries, two of my teachers are here tonight, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Hoppen. And like basically with this conversation, I don't think there's ever been a time that I've been more disappointed in Granville, not only just from the way the levy turned out to the cuts that we're making. I just want to point out the irony in the fact that a lot of the reason this levy failed was because of the spreading of misinformation and fake news. And the librarians are the ones that teach kids how not to do that. There are a lot of positions that I thought should have been cut long before, from someone else mentioned expensive administrative positions. At least other ways this could have been done, but I think it's horribly ironic, and I think the rationale was never given, and even if it was, I don't think it's one that I would agree with as a student. I think I can speak for at least a large number of my peers when they would agree with saying that we're all very disappointed, and I really hope Granville goes on in a different direction once my time at Granville is passed.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak this evening? No? Okay. With that, we'll close the public comment section. Thank you all for your comments. We move now to the board discussion section of our agenda, where the board typically discusses in an open forum some of the issues of the day, and obviously some of those issues were the ones addressed in public comment. We've listed on our board discussion the reduction in force, the funding form, the pay to participate. We're not, of course, limited to that, but if there are comments or observations that the board would like to make, now's the time.
Jeff, could you start by kind of just framing the discussion about the process that is involved in a reduction in force and how we work with the association and the administration and the board to come up with that?
Right. So the reduction in force is, first of all, never something anybody wants to do. Administration, board, staff, it's an unfortunate byproduct of something like a levy loss. So what we do in the collective bargaining agreement, there is a structure of notification of the potential of a reduction in force. that is given to the Education Association. The administration starts working on a list of potential cuts that is shared with the association leadership. The association leadership then has the ability to go into executive session with the board and share their perspective, which they did. They met with the board prior to the election. And then really once the levy failed, we immediately went into executive session to formalize some of the items that needed to be discussed, and we notified employees, and then there's a 14-day window for any board action to occur. But from a criterion standpoint, I think the greatest criteria is having the least impact on the classroom. So when you look at this list of the certificated staff, 50% of them are administrative and 50% are teaching positions. So you will see that there is a balance of administrative, certificated teaching staff, support staff, and transportation. So I think the board's criterion was to protect the classroom as much as possible. So,
Yeah, you're.
but you can you're the board. You can articulate what your perspective was as far as the criteria.
Yeah, I appreciated the session that we had with our teachers union, the Granville Education Association, and they brought forth some very good points that we did our best to listen to in trying to find a way to minimize that impact on the classroom, right? And for example, fees are an important part of that, to be able to minimize the number of teaching staff that are actually eliminated. And I wish to say that there were lots of other administrative roles that are not important that we could have gotten rid of first. There just aren't any, from my perspective. And we looked really long and hard, and we tried to find it, and we made cuts in the administration that are really bad for our district, right? You know, specifically around an assistant principal who serves both the elementary and the intermediate school. That's a really difficult position to lose administratively. But all of the roles that we have, you know, there are no good options, right? We don't have fluff and so forth in the organization, and I wish there were. I wish there were other magic solutions of expensive things and expensive administrators that we paid for that were not necessary. But I think we were all pretty well aligned with the administration and the whole team that you worked with, the teaching staff through the GEA, and the board as the community representatives in trying to come up with this prioritization. And there's no prioritization that's good, you know, when you get to this level of things. And it's, again, not why we want to become board members. It's not what we want to do as administration and so forth. And I wish there were other ways.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think I would disagree with Mr. Manos. I don't think any of these cuts were easy, because we have these people here. We obviously valued what it is that they do. Unfortunately, you know, we had a deficit that we had to address, and you know, we have librarians because we think they're important. You know, cutting the assistant principal means now there's one administrator at the elementary school who is in charge of 700 students, and similarly at GIS, and so
Under the age of 10.
Under the age of 10.
Yes.
So, and you know, our communications coordinator, you know, people always want more information, and now it's going to come out less often. So I would just argue that none of these cuts were particularly easy. If you're overstaffed because your enrollment's declining, and you know, that's a different story, but that's not what's happening here. And I would argue that none of these cuts were particularly easy to come to. So I just wanted to say that. But I do like, what we did talk about was that, you know, student-teacher ratios are important, and they're important for the success of our students. And we felt like, you know, at least in my opinion, we did have to protect that as much as we possibly could, because that's the every single day, most of the day, that impacts students. So I would agree with with Mr. Brown's assessment that that's what we tried to protect in these cuts.
Anybody else?
I'd just like to add that as the newest board member, that my colleagues on the board, we thought about this long and hard. And as Mr. Brown mentioned, our decision-making is what we thought would have the least impact on the classroom directly going into it. And none of these decisions were made easy. And we asked lots of questions, and can we do certain things to try to minimize that? And I think it's important for the public. I'd like the public to understand that this wasn't taken lightly, and we tried to minimize what we had to do following the results of the levy. And no one on this board, which I'm privileged to serve on and with, took any of this lightly. And I'll echo Mr. Miller's comments. It was really enlightening for me and encouraging when we did meet with the Education Association members. It was a very good discussion, and at least for myself, I got a better understanding where they were coming from, and they got an understanding about the board. And there's a lot of mutual respect there, which I think is a great situation for us to have moving forward and working with them.
I'd like to actually, I really appreciate that Erica and Letitia came and spoke about what they do. Because this is not a decision because we didn't value what they did. I mean, it's not. They are both phenomenal at what they do. And Annette, Beth, Shar, and Teresa all are phenomenal at what they do. We just had to make a decision to not deficit spend. And so it is not that we didn't value their productivity or what they offered to our students. And I'm really glad that they spoke about that.
And they're not alone in the community. We've heard a lot of feedback from a number of community members, right, about all of these positions and significant concerns that I share.
I think you're right. I'm glad they came and spoke to us tonight as well. It put faces with the names that are on our paperwork here tonight. Every one of the folks that we made a decision to terminate their employment is a person who served this district and this community extraordinarily well and selflessly. It's been a job. Certainly they've been paid for it, but anyone who knows educators knows it's more than just a job. It's a calling. It's a calling for each one of these folks. It's a calling for the colleagues that they're leaving behind. And the lives they've impacted, as Rick Maxwell indicated, and others would second, I know. That impact will go on for a long period of time. You know, my wife and I have 4 kids, 3 of whom have graduated from the Granville School District. My oldest daughter just finished her 2nd year of law school. She went to a good college. And when she got to that college, she called me up and she said, "Dad, you'd be amazed at how many kids are in my college who've never written more than a 3 or 4 page research paper. They don't know how to do the research. They don't know how to do the work. They don't know how to put it together." I learned that in the 6th grade. And where she learned it was in the library. You know, that got her through college in 3.5 years. I'm enormously proud, obviously, of her father. Got her into law school. It will serve her well in the rest of her career and the rest of her life. So, you know, I've talked to a number of folks since the levy failed. We had comments tonight about what we spend versus the state average. I've run a number of businesses. I've run large divisions of large multinational corporations. I've also run startup businesses where We used to joke we were three guys in a closet trying to, make a living and living on a shoestring budget. I'm not naive enough to think that any one of us, anyone in the community, couldn't point to one expenditure that we make in this $30 million budget and say, you don't need that. But everybody's going to have a different view. Carol, as you indicated, everybody's going to have a different view. What I would say is it takes all of that to produce what is produced here. And it's produced, obviously, because we have a wonderful community that supports and demands excellence in education, that prepares their children to learn. And we have a wonderful learning environment with a staff that is committed to do whatever it takes to make sure that every kid, every child benefits from that. And so it's kind of, in some ways, surgical to go in and say we're going to pick out a few positions in the $30 million budget and a staff of 200 people, and we're going to cut those folks. And while we say, and we mean it, that we tried to make cuts that wouldn't impact the classroom, every one of those cuts is impactful to our children, every single one of them. We're not average in Granville. Our schools aren't average, and the community doesn't want average. So we spend more than its average. We spend less than a lot of good schools spend. But we'll spend more than average, and I won't apologize for it. We spend what we think it takes in order to provide the education that we think this community expects. And I am enormously sorry for the folks that we're losing and the value that's lost. The impact on their lives, the impact on the lives of the kids that they work with every day. The costs of good schools are not going down. I'm always reminded of the quote, I don't know if Warren Buffett originated it, but he said it a number of times. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. When we focus on the price instead of the value, we lose sight of what really matters in this community. And I think that happens. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us. And this board, I know, welcomes the opportunity to engage with the community, talk about the value that we create and what it costs to create that value. We welcome the opportunity to examine every bit of what we spend, to justify what we do, and to find ways to save where we can save, but to try, like anything, not to impact negatively the students that we're responsible for. We've not met that obligation tonight in making this decision, and I'm sorry about that. As Thomas said, none of us joined the board because we wanted to do that. This is now the second go-round for me and several others of my colleagues on this board. The last time was a little different, and it still was very impactful to personal lives, but we right-sized the district because we were overstaffed. We're not overstaffed. So there will be losses felt as a result of these cuts. It may be a while before we recognize what those losses are, or how impactful they are, but they're likely to be profound. So I'm really grateful. And honored that Letitia and Erica came to speak to us tonight about what they do. We should honor what they do because it does matter, and I hope that they know that. There are other comments that were made tonight, and I think they're valid, and we need to be concerned with them. We've talked about pay to participate, and the potential impact in dissuading kids from participating, from trying something new. I mean, this is the period in their life when we want our children in a safe environment to be trying new things. Try out a new instrument in the band, try out a new sport on the athletic field, try out something new in a club. This is the time we want that to happen. We want them to be experimenting, to be filled with wonder, and to think about what they might do. And I'm concerned, as are we all, that with fees that we think we will end up imposing, that we may impose, that will dissuade some kids. I can tell you from experience, one of my children played on a high school tennis team. And in her senior year, there were a couple of girls who came out for the team for the very first time. And they had a ball. When they started out, they were just learning to play. They didn't add significantly to the cost of that team. The coach was already in place. The facility was already in place. But those kids came out because they wanted to try something. They became an integral part of that team. You know, that group of kids, when they were seniors, had a wonderful time. They became united. And those girls all had that memory at the end. And I don't know, you know, what impact it had on the lives of the girls who tried it for the first time, but I have to imagine it was meaningful to them, that they'll look back on that and remember that. And I think, at least I worry, that, you know, if they had to try something new for the first time and it had a $175 fee on it, maybe they wouldn't have done it. Again, that's a loss. That's a loss for all of us. So I'm not attempting to prejudge what we should or will do with respect to funding our schools. I am, as my colleagues are, extraordinarily open and eager to hear from folks, and we want to find a way. And we will do everything we can to be as efficient as we can, as we have always tried to be. But I think we all need to understand and recognize that every time something like this happens, that every time we say we're not impacting the classroom, that doesn't mean we're not impacting education. We are. Any other comments?
Yeah, let's talk about process a little bit, because there was some discussion during the levy about why we didn't announce who we were gonna, or what cuts we were gonna make ahead of time, and you know, that we're only now just discussing how we came to our decision. And I just wanted to sort of, I mean, you spoke about what, you know, there are things that we have to do with the union, and then we have to give them 2 weeks. We can only, I mean, we can't vote on it for 2 weeks after we actually make, you know, the announcements, or, you know, to the teachers. But also, you know, as a board, we can't discuss things except for in a public space, right? And so this was our scheduled meeting. So if you're not getting the information only just now, it's part of the process, right? And we weren't like sort of trying to hold back on anything. And I personally didn't want to like sort of announce things ahead of time, because these are people's lives. And if we didn't have to make these cuts, then I think I would have felt horrible for, you know, having them be worried for 6 weeks that, you know, that their job was on the line, and unnecessarily so. And so I just, you know, there's a lot of process involved in all of this, and I just think, we need to sort of just lay that out there, that it's, you know.
And the philosophy of communicating potential cuts prior to is viewed negatively. It's like a snow day for me. I'm wrong all the time. So just ask any, 50% say I'm brilliant, 50% say I'm not so much. The same is true in, you're wrong on either side. Some people view that as a threat, some people view that as not being transparent. So we placed our error on, not necessarily making people have to go through that process for 6 weeks, leading up to the election. So I think that, unfortunately, we have to go through with the cuts that were identified.
We do.
Yeah. What we said in advance is if it didn't pass, we would have to make reductions in the budget.
Yep.
What we didn't say specifically is where those reductions would be. And frankly, as we've talked about, you could survey 100 people in this community and you'd probably get maybe not 100, but a lot of different opinions about where we should have cut, about this person or that person, or this service or that service, or this curriculum or that. So I don't think that we could have done that we should have specified in advance.
I think there's also things, I'm thinking about, that we are getting outside funding to fund a part-time teacher. While I prefer not to do it, there are people in the community who think we do too much, and that we offer too much. And so I don't think so. And I think that this position at the intermediate school is really valuable. There's a lot of students really interested in music. I'm thankful to the boosters for, you know, and perhaps it's only for a year, and, you know, it protects that position, so I appreciate that very much. And, you know, sometimes we have to be creative in the way we fund things in the short term. So, I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, and I think the one thing I would add is the boosters have always funded auxiliary instruction.
Not that I can-
Always.
Mhm.
They spend, I would say you probably spend 8,000 to 9,000 every year.
13,000 on direct instruction this year.
Yeah, so they bring
So
in
that's not-
outside experts for sectionals and things like that, so
Mhm.
it's not necessarily uncommon. It is uncommon for them to actually fund an employee that we are hiring.
Right.
And one thing I'd like to add, and my involvement's been through the athletic boosters, and not just in Granville, but talking to my counterparts in other districts and even around the state. And it's been very tough for me to get my head around it, is booster clubs are changing. I've lived in a lot of different places outside of Ohio, and the boosters, what I'd characterize, were always gravy. And they were the extras. And it's not just in our district, but what is being asked of them is changing over time. And I've had to get used to that. I was vehemently opposed to some of the things that we've funded in the last few years when it was first brought up, and it's just not unique to here, to Granville. There's a change going on, what boosters are being asked to help support, for better or for worse. So it's just, I think it's kind of the way of the world, and it's something we're gonna have to deal with as parents on boosters and things, that there's different requests being made by school districts. So.
Yeah, which reflects just a general trend in our nation, our taxation structure of pushing things locally, right? I mean, and it's hard to get used to. Like, people see like, wow, that's a big increase in my taxes. Yes, it is, right? And we're just trying to meet inflationary growth primarily of the programs that we have in place, but we also have a lot of A, reduced funding, and B, leaks in the bucket due to unfunded mandates and things, right? So I think it's a shifting mentality, like you said, and whether it be to the boosters or whether it be from the state and federal government back to local districts, right? It's a trend that's out there, and it's really tough to get your arms around and tough to get used to, and it manifested things like, you know, having to pay for the meat and potatoes instead of the gravy, right? That's not what a booster organization should be, right? It manifested things like having to pay a whole lot more taxes locally, right? Instead of counting on the state or some federal funding to do that and so forth. And it's a shift in mentality that's hard to take, right? Because you got to think about it a lot. You got to look at the numbers. You got to really analyze all the finances to figure out that this is the right magnitude and so forth. It's hard to get your head around, right? If you're not really engaged. Right, and you know, and I think it's hard to be engaged enough. You know, we have a whole lot of folks in Granville that don't have hours to sit through school funding discussions and things like that, right? And I hope that they entrust us to some extent with helping understand those things and sitting through the hours and hours of presentations and really dig into those things as their representatives, right? Because that's what I consider my job to be. I mean, I consider these funds to be my money, our community's money as much, and I entrust it like that, and that's how we make our decisions. But it's tough, you know, when you're being asked for a big increase here locally, right? You might not factor in other things that are happening in the broader world and so forth. And so I think it's just a continued communication process in a cultural readjustment and realignment that we need to get used to.
One other thing I'd like to address in discussions with Pay to Participate, I'm old enough here that my son was involved in the 1 year that they had it. And I know then, and the athletic boosters at least have offered that if there are student athletes that for Pay to Participate, that they would help cover the cost of that. So we're, hopeful that, as Russ was talking about, that if they want to participate, we'll be able to support them to do that.
Thank you.
On pay to participate, so what's the process? Are we, is it June, we're gonna start to see some proposals for
Yeah.
it? Okay, and that's when we'll discuss it more fully, then, okay.
We know that the amount, as Russ stated, we targeted $640,000 of reduction. You saw the staff, you're gonna act on the staff side of the equation. You're also acting on the shifting of the convenience fee. Pay to participate, at this point, we've just identified the targeted number, 175.
And you'll come back with proposals about alternatives, and so we can, be engaged in that process
Yes.
and get the community's feedback to make the right decision there.
Yes.
Further comment?
I'd like to kind of ask a question or see if we want to bring up, I heard in the funding forum earlier today, a desire to have a community-led initiative on a stadium or turf specifically, right? And I know this is our only chance to have a discussion about that, and I'm not sure I'm prepared to, because I just sort of heard that come up as a first concept. And I wondered if others had comments on that, or if there were thoughts on where we should go with that. And it's hard to just ask you out of the blue on that, right? But this is our only chance to talk, and that was first really I'd heard of it, and I've heard conversations, and of course it was a conversation during our levy campaign, which, I think was spun a couple different ways and so forth, unfortunately. So I wanted to bring it up and see if other folks had thoughts, or if there were ideas of how we should proceed relative to that. Maybe that was just a brainstorming idea that came up, but at least that concept.
It's not a new idea. We've talked about it, not generally openly. We've talked about it for a couple of years now, about the fact that if we were to undertake significant improvements to the athletic stadium, or even to all of our athletic facilities, that it would be funded through a fundraise. There'd be a largely public, but largely private, but some public contribution, similar to what happened when the playground was renovated recently. The challenge there is finding members of the community who are willing to step up and take on that significant obligation to go raise that amount of money. I'm convinced we can do it. I'm convinced it's the right way to do it. And when I say that, I'm talking about, whether a decision was made to put in turf or something like that. I continue to believe that it's our obligation as a district and our obligation as a board to ensure that our facilities are safe and accessible for all of our patrons, whether it's students, staff, members of the community. So if it comes to fixing problems with the stands because they're not safe, we have an obligation to do that. But enhancements, whether it's turf, whether it's something else, I think ought to be a private fundraising. I think that's something we ought to think about. We ought to put our feelers out there, if that's what the board would like to do, to see whether there are folks in the community who'd like to take on that that significant job.
I think it's also important to state that you are open to donors.
Yes.
One of the things that I heard was that, people have approached and been turned down. I can say that my time leading this district, and most of you who have served on this board at similar timeframes, we are open for business, so to speak. If someone is interested in, potential naming rights or any of those types of things, there's policy involved with that, but we are absolutely interested in those conversations, just like we did with the indoor hitting facility at the baseball field. A generous person decided to provide us the revenue to build that building, and we did, in a very short turnaround. So, I'm open for business.
Yeah.
If anybody is interested in, one, leading a campaign Ben, you got extra time on your hands now? Yeah, you know, I think it's important, that I tend to agree with Mr. Janice that, the stands are a different story from my vantage point as your risk manager. It's a different perspective. But yeah, public-private partnerships are absolutely the way to go, and we would be interested in having those conversations.
As part of that same conversation, did they also mention like raising money privately for just capital needs in general? Like, and can we even do that? Like, I didn't know if I was sitting over here in the corner, so I couldn't hear what she was saying.
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
It was stated.
Yeah.
It's not to say that, you know, it couldn't maybe have a broader
But there's,
objective, but it was
yeah,
stadium focused.
for stadium focus, okay. Because there's issues with, we can't really.
Sure,
Can
no, we could, we absolutely could, right?
If somebody
Yeah.
wanted to, it's no different than someone came and donated money for us to put the wrestling wall into
Well, that's true,
Mhm.
right, okay.
into the high school. If somebody came and wanted
To buy boilers?
To buy
Yeah,
boilers,
buy
right,
boilers.
okay.
Bring it on.
Bring it
you
on.
know.
No, but I think it's kind of incumbent on us to kind of, you know, help the community understand the aspirational things that we do have, right, in light of our financial situation and what kinds of things we can do. And I know the Granville Education Foundation has had strategic discussions about like sort of what's next, and we'll meet again tomorrow to talk a little bit about like in light of the levy, what's next and what do we step up and do? What are the projects that are maybe more significant, but that can inspire, you know, community members to see, wow, I really would love to have a makerspace, or how do we, you know, serve the function of a library in some way, or what are the other capital or human capital kinds of needs we have? And I think we need to be floating those out there as a district for the community's consideration to some capacity.
The one thing that I will say is, you know, when you're talking about staffing, you know, the problem is when a private donor goes away, that program tends to go away.
Yep.
So you need to look at one-time expenditures.
Yep.
That really are,
Capital need.
yeah,
Mhm.
a capital need.
That's a good point.
I definitely think it's something that we need to, as Thomas said, help propel and move it forward.
Mhm.
Any additional comments from the board? No? Okay. Thank you. Should we move to the action agenda?
No,
Board
board
reports
reports.
first.
Oh, excuse me, thank you. Board reports.
And you're next.
And mine next. So I have the opportunity to report on economic sustainability, which is obviously highly topical. Was mentioned quite frequently tonight, and I think in all quadrants of the room, and certainly in the quadrant of the room that I was in, the sort of outside the box thinking capabilities. And to refresh everybody's recollection, 5 years ago when we passed a levy by 41 votes, this board, shortly thereafter, publicly, repeatedly, said that there's an issue here with not only financing our schools, which is our responsibility, but with economic sustainability in the community, and that we needed to try and undertake an effort, a community-wide effort, involving all aspects of government and private enterprise, to come up with a new way to look at economic sustainability and funding. And predominantly, that was focused on broadening the commercial tax base, which is extremely narrow, as we all know, in this community relative to other communities around the state. We've had a number of endeavors over the last 5 years to try and move that rock up the hill, and with not nearly enough success, but we'll continue to try. So just so everyone knows, the Economic Sustainability Committee, which was formed out of the meeting that we convened with the village council, the township trustees, the GRD, and the chamber several years ago, met a number of times and then suddenly stopped meeting for reasons unclear to me. There have been several other opportunities that I've been involved in. I think Thomas has been involved. I think Mike's been involved as well. Several other sort of subcommittees formed out of the trustees and the village council, and they've been kind enough to invite us to participate. Most recently, well, recently is last night. We had what I think is our final meeting of what was known as the South Main Street subcommittee. That was to deal with the fact that the bridge on 37 over the highway is going to be replaced by ODOT beginning in 2019 and completed hopefully in 2020. As part of that, there were a number of considerations over what the aesthetics of the bridge would look like. I'm the least person qualified in the community to opine on what the bridge aesthetics would look like, but others fortunately were better at that. But we also talked about traffic flow because it impacts what we do. We contribute mightily to the traffic in this community. We talked about the installation of stoplights, replacement stoplights at the bridge, replacement stoplights at the intersection of South Main Street and River Road in Weaver. We talked about creating a back channel or spur road, if you will, off of River Road going sort of behind where the village service center is and coming out somewhere around the IGA. That would help alleviate some of the traffic load off of South Main Street. And we also talked importantly about development on Weaver and River Road and extending sewer and water, which the village controls, down from where it is now, which is essentially just short of where Real Deals is, around the corner towards the River Road coffee shop, and making it available to not only the River Road facility there, but proposed development across the street. I don't know how many meetings we had, 8 maybe. The bridge is going to happen one way or the other, and ODOT will do what they'll do, and we've made recommendations there, but my particular interest was in that extension of sewer and water to try and spur some development. The committee met last night, and the chairpersons, Bill Wilkin, who's head of the village planning commission, and Brent Bird, who's on the township trustees, are going to take our recommendations and draft them into a final report and present it ultimately to the trustees and to the village council. Really the key here is the village council, because they'll control sewer and water, and they'll control to a large extent that spur road that this committee thinks needs to be built down off of River Road. There will come a time when that report is available in draft form, and I'd like to circulate it to everyone here. And what I'll ask, assuming the report is consistent with what I believe we spoke with last night, what I'll ask is that the board endorse it and support it and urge that it be adopted by the village council and the township trustees. That's the most tangible opportunity for some economic sustainability, for some commercial development in an area that is primed for commercial development, that is not residential, that is not going to negatively impact the lives of folks in homes in this community. And I'd like to see that happen. So I'll report back to that, to this group. It will certainly be by the next meeting, and maybe sooner than the next meeting when that report is available. The other aspect of economic sustainability is, as you know, we have, all of us continue to advocate for the last number of years about development that is consistent with the general plan and conforms to zoning. There was a proposal recently that the village council met on a number of times, including their most recent meeting 10 days ago, called Eaton Woods. That's a residential commercial development down on Newark Granville Road. Mr. Miller and I were at the meeting. I spoke in favor of, I encouraged the council to approve projects which are, again, consistent with the general plan and compliant with zoning. After a number of discussions, they approved, I think, on a 4-3 vote. The residential portion, some of the commercial portion, they did not approve as proposed. The developers' ideas for a restaurant, actually 2 restaurants in the commercial section down there. I don't know what the result will ultimately be. But we advocated for it, not because we, had any animus towards any of the homeowners who live next to that project, but because we think development, commercial development, is consistent with the general plan, conforms to zoning, needs to happen in this community. We received some criticism for that, and my response was, we've been singing that song for 5 years. And it's our obligation to do that, and we'll continue to do that. So I'm going to jump off my soapbox here and stop, but I appreciate all of the support that you all and encouragement that you all have given to this effort over this last period of time. And what I would tell you is, there's work to be done.
Thanks, Russ.
Great. The Granville Arts Boosters meeting is next, and I had the kind of privilege and honor to attend. It's been a long time since I have, and it was a fantastic forum. There were 25 people there, which was great for a booster organization. I think partly inspired by the new focus on the Granville Arts Boosters and the desire to get our hands around what that's going to be. But we did have a significant discussion about the levy and the loss of levy, and the discussion of temporarily funding the one position at the intermediate school was brought up and discussed. And so I'm really pleased to hear that the music boosters have agreed to fund a portion of that, right, in a similar way that they fund the ongoing instruction. And I was a little surprised and pleased by the magnitude of the boosters' annual budget. It's a really significant contribution to our programs here in every way, and they do a fantastic job of fundraising, not just from community members individually, but through their various fundraisers and more. So I was really pleased to be a part of that, and I hope that we as a board can find ways to continue to engage in all of our support organizations. And I'm committed to doing that. I've been represented on the Granville Education Foundation, but I know we have huge support in the PTO. We have great in both of our PTOs. We have great support through the athletic boosters as well. And I'd encourage us all to find ways to make more direct connections and find more opportunities to attend. These are just folks that are as passionate about education as we are, right, and supportive in many ways. And I think the more that we can be there with them, right, and hear their comments and concerns and hear their priorities and bring that to the board and the administration, as well as communicate the things that are on our mind and the things that are on from the perspective of the district, I think just really helps overall things work well. And so I'm encouraged to find ways to do that, and I encourage us all to think about if we can divvy up those organizations. And I'm not saying everybody go to every meeting, right, but an occasional attendance in those, I think, would go a long way toward improving the communications in general, right, and finding a way to synchronize with our booster organizations that are so important for us. So I was really pleased to participate, and great to see the active work that's going on there, and look forward to continuing to be engaged. So it was a
I
great
think your
meeting.
suggestion is spot on. I think, and I'm probably the worst at attending these meetings, but I think it's a real opportunity for us to continue to engage on a broader level. Folks who, as Thomas said, are committed, passionate to education and to the benefit of our kids. So I think we would all benefit from engaging more frequently in that. And I'd like us to think about, not that I want to presume we can invite ourselves to join, but we certainly ought to be able to attend and give feedback and hear feedback.
I'll take care of athletic boosters.
$25,
you can.
You know where they meet.
Yeah.
But I'd love to be involved with athletic boosters as well. And I think if we kind of find ways to kind of divvy up our responsibilities and connect with new and different groups and people like that, we'll get really interesting ideas and feedback. I think that's an important job of the board, is to be the arm of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we can reach out to not only those that are our typical constituents or whatever, but others as well, I think that's really important for us. So
We spend a lot of time, and I know Jeff and Mike work tirelessly working in community organizations, Rotary, Kiwanis, Chamber, and other places, and Fred, I know you work tirelessly with the boosters, and we have opportunities, I think, not only with the affinity organizations like art boosters, and athletic boosters, but the PTO, the middle school parents, and others. So I think I would suggest that we consider, for lack of a better word, formalizing or institutionalizing that, and making sure that that we're doing that and getting out on a regular basis, and then rotating it so that we all have some exposure to it.
great.
Mike?
Just quickly, last week was both the annual election of board members and the annual finance meeting for Newark Granville Community Authority. There were 4 positions that were voted on. 2 were actually vacant. 2 were existing members. There were 6 candidates for the 4 positions. The 4 members who were elected, Betsy Hampton, who is the current vice president, who's a longtime member, was reelected. And there are 3 new members now to the board: Kevin Kohlheim, Eric Minton, and Robert Varga. So we're pleased to have. This is the first time there's ever been more people running for a position on there than were actually positions available. So it was nice to have that level of participation and interest. At the meeting then last Thursday, the board took 2 actions that are part of their annual action. One is to approve the community charge, the 5.2 mil charge that is on the special assessment at Park Trails. Although they're not allowed to change it without the school board's approval, but they did approve it. And they also approved the budget, which is actually a portion of our capital budget. It was actually 3 of the lines you saw in the capital budget presentation earlier. They are going to do the 1-to-1 again. They've done it the last couple of years. The safety pieces that were in the budget, there's $37,000 for certain types of safety equipment in the buildings. That and to replace the van that is used to transport special needs students that is desperately in need of being replaced.
Great.
Great. Any questions on any of the board reports? Now we'll move to the action agenda.
Okay. Action item 11.01, I recommend with regret and appreciation of service the reduction in force.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Said as much as we can say?
Yeah.
Take the roll, please.
Dr. Corn,
With regret, yes.
Mr. Wolf,
Sadly, yes.
Ms. Deeds, Mr. Miller,
Aye.
and Mr. Janice.
Aye.
Action item 11.02 is the approval of shifting the convenience fee for online payments during the 18-19 school year.
So moved.
Second?
Discussion, questions?
You presented this in
This was in the 5-year
the 5-year
Yeah,
forecast. so-
it's roughly $40,000 that the board has been covering.
And to be clear, one of the reasons that we have not in the past assessed that convenience fee is because we wanted and needed to encourage the utilization of pay for it. And ultimately, it had some cost savings to us in terms of staff time.
There will be administrative burden from people who will choose not to no longer use the online system and rather pay by check or cash.
Right.
Is
So,
it a
go
per
ahead.
transaction fee?
Hmm?
Is it a per transaction
It's
fee?
per transaction fee.
How much is it?
It's, I think it's about, well, we're still looking at provider right now,
Mhm.
but it's about, I think it's about 4%.
Okay.
So that $40,000 could end up being less than 40 if we see usage decline. It's an
Well,
expense.
it's
an
still a
expense we're-
saving and an expense to
Got it.
us.
Yeah.
Got it. But we could incur additional expenses
There-
administratively.
There might be additional administrative expenses.
Thank you.
More,
And-
I would characterize it more as administrative burden than expenses, I think.
And another kind of concern that I have is that the fact that it is a convenience allows people to pay more regularly and frequently. And if we have to count on folks sending in checks and so forth, you don't want to have to spend our time chasing people to do that and so forth. But delinquencies in fees is an issue that we need to address in general as a district, right? To find ways, and I know we're handcuffed a bit by some of the regulations, but there's got to be ways that we can ensure that we get payment for the fees that are due, and that's going to become harder as the fees go up.
And that's a discussion I think that we're gonna have to have sometime in the next couple of meetings, especially around, uncollected lunch fees because of some new federal regulations.
Let's have that discussion sooner rather than later. Please. Any other questions? Take the roll.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Dr. Cornman.
Aye.
Mr. Wolf,
Aye.
Ms. Deeds. Mr. Janice.
Aye.
Thank you. 11.03 is Now this I'm actually happy about. The list of the 2017-2018 graduates.
So moved. Amy beat me to it, but I'm going to second. It is one of the pleasures.
And so, as always, the board is invited to attend the graduation ceremony at the Mitchell Center on Sunday, May 27th, and at 2 o'clock, but get there at 1. And Kathy will hopefully have spaces reserved for you.
Yeah.
So, very excited about walking another group of students across the stage.
That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Congratulations to the soon-to-be
Yes.
student graduates.
Take the roll.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Mr. Janice?
Aye.
Okay, action item 11.04 is the gifted handbook for the 18-19 school year.
So moved.
Second.
So, one of the major changes that needed to occur is we eliminated the A-Space program at the elementary and reallocated that staff member to 5th grade. And so we had to adjust our gifted handbook, and that's really the only major change that occurred in that handbook moving forward.
Questions? No? Again, the result of
Yes.
layoffs.
Yes.
Cuts we've made. Take the roll, please.
Dr. Corman?
Yes.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Janice?
Aye.
Next item is 11.05, the Alliance for High Quality Education dues.
So moved.
Second.
This is our advocacy arm, our lobbying arm, that I am the vice chair of the Alliance, and was downtown today, trying to position ourselves to, work with both gubernatorial candidates on not only funding, but also some significant policy changes that would be in the best interest of all students in the state of Ohio. We have a very good lobbyist that is part of that organization that is a real advocate for public education.
I think it's, one of the clear feedbacks we heard throughout the levy campaign was the broken system at the state level, right? And this is a minimal investment to have a big leverage on hopefully finding sustainable ways that the state overall, as well as our local community, can do it. So I'm supportive of this, and I thank you very much for your time that you've put into it as well to make sure that we can appropriately advocate there.
Thank you.
There have been some notable achievements in the past, including changes that you advocated for in the state testing curriculum and
And the teacher
and
evaluation
teacher
system.
evaluation. So
Hopefully, Senate Bill 216 will pass. It might have gone out of the House this morning, I have to check, but it didn't move.
It's, as Thomas said, it's an investment that's well worthwhile, and more importantly, the investment of time that both of you make down at the State House has been important to Granville.
Thank you.
Take the roll.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Janice?
Aye.
Thank you. 11.06 is the approval of the resolution for membership in the OHSAA.
So moved.
Second.
This is our annual approval to be affiliated with the OHSAA, which is the governing body for athletics in Ohio.
Questions?
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Mr. Janice?
Aye.
Thank you. 11.07 is the LACA service level agreement for 18-19.
So moved.
As you know, LACA, and Mr. Wolf, you're new, so LACA is our ITC, our Information Technology Center. There are several around the state that get significant state funding to provide our internet infrastructure. So we are affiliated with LACA with that service. They are co-located in the Roosevelt Building in Newark with Newark City Schools. and the Licking County ESC. And we typically, those costs have remained stagnant or have gone down over time as they add new districts to the lack of service agreement. And they do a pretty nice job in providing that service. We feel like we have the ability to directly influence how they operate through our membership on their board.
Questions?
Dr. Corman?
Yes. Aye.
Ms. Dees? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Janine?
Aye.
Okay, 11.08.
Sorry,
I know.
CTEC we say yes, so, you know, sorry. And that was,
okay.
that meeting was last night, so.
Yeah. 11.08 is the OSBA web-based update service.
So moved.
Second.
So we pay OSBA to house our board policies, and we link to them on our board website. And so there's a service fee for that.
And they provide our updates, did you say
Yep.
that? Yeah, okay.
They provide updates, and they also provide the quarterly that drive the policy updates that I provide to the board.
Mm-hmm.
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Dees?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Mr. Janine?
Aye.
Thank you. Last action item is 11.09, the approval of lunch price increase.
So moved.
Second?
So the lunch fee has been stagnant for 5 years.
We have not raised.
We have not raised the price, so it is not due to the levy failure. It is due to commodity pricing increases.
Yeah, I'm so proud of the food that we offer our kids and things like that. It's really great, you know, when you go into our cafeterias and see what's being served compared to what the federal minimum standards are. It's scary what those other standards are. But we do a fantastic job, and the fact that we've been able to keep our price in line, you know, only increasing 5 cents over 5 years is not bad.
Good value. My kids will want to know if they get no pepperonis on the stromboli now.
Yeah. That is more related to the federal health guidelines than anything else. But
Maybe
I will tell you,
vegetarian
Mr. Welker agrees. Yeah.
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Dees?
Aye.
Mr. Janine?
Aye.
Thank you. We have a very full consent agenda, so I'd like approval for 12.01A through D.
So moved.
Second. All right, so what I'd like to highlight, one is the acceptance of donations and gifts and grants, some from the PTO and others from the Licking County Foundation. We always appreciate the donations that we receive. Under employment, you have extended time contracts and all of the certified and support staff contract renewals for next year, including the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and continuing contract. Personnel, we also have the exempted employee contract renewals for people who operate within district office that are non-administrative. And with regret, we have the acceptance of the resignations of Stephanie Stanton, Stephanie Eversole, and Joe Dowling, that Stephanie Stanton is leaving this role and fulfilling another role that is in partnership with CTEC on the business entrepreneurial pathway, that we are partnering with them for next year. So she is still within our organization, but resigning from her current role as educational aide. Steffi Eversole is our speech and language pathologist, and she is going to pursue something outside of education, but in the same healthcare role. And Joe Dowling is moving on. So with appreciation of their service to our community, I recommend the resignations. And then the field trips, as always, those trips are paid for by the parents and or the organizations that they support.
On the speech language pathologist, resignation, is that a position you intend to fill again, or is that something we can contract with outside?
We absolutely have to fill that position. We actually were in a position to talk about, would we have to increase due to numbers? Because we only have 2 for the entire district. And typically we have speech and language issues that are pretty comprehensive at the lower grade levels, and then, the numbers get lower as they move up. But it is something that we will absolutely need to have in place. If we can't find an employee, then we would look at potential contracted service.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Dees? Dr. Cornwell?
Aye.
Mr. Janice?
Aye.
Thank you.
Finances?
Okay, first is the approval of the April 2018 financial report.
So moved?
Amy?
If anyone doesn't mind, I am not going to go through the report. There is nothing in there that I have not already discussed as part of the 5-year forecast presentation. If you have any questions, but I don't think we'll make a formal presentation of that tonight.
That's fine, we did receive copies of that, so thank you.
We did receive copies.
Any questions?
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Dees? Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Dr. Cornwell?
Aye.
Mr. Janice?
Aye.
Thank you. Next is the approval of the 5-year forecast for me to submit to the state.
Second?
Let's hear it again.
Yeah.
Would you?
No.
The actual forecast, which is actually not part of the presentation, is in your packet. In the line items, it's everything you saw in there was reflected in simpler terms on that
Yeah.
in the presentation.
I think that's, going to be such an important foundational thing as we start to think and come up with different strategies for, how we sustainably run the district and what services we offer and what we don't. So it's one sort of baseline, right? But really, I think needs to be thought about differently as we want to really consider what services we're going to offer, what capital needs we have, and so forth that might or might not have been in there. Because, again, we can't include future levies in there and the spending that could be associated with those. So we'll have to think differently about how we effectively and transparently communicate the forecast, right? Not just as it was presented for the May forecast, but as we would like to see it as a district, and what kinds of things are in there and not in there in the future, and what kind of things are at risk, and what kinds of things, we would like to do to continue to grow the experience here. But that's an important foundational document, and I appreciate, Mike, all your great work and always making those right.
The only thing I do want to add, the notes that go with it, I was actually hoping to have those done before tonight. They are about half written. I'm hoping to finish them tomorrow. I will circulate them to the board members as part of our correspondence on Friday, and then for comments, and then I will go ahead and submit everything probably on Tuesday.
Very good.
Thank you. Questions?
Ms. Dees?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Cornman?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Janice?
Aye.
Okay, last item, fingers crossed, the final appropriation for fiscal year 2018.
Better be. So moved.
Second?
There are 3 changes to the appropriation from what was adopted back in December. One is $1,000 that I got through my awards that were given as scholarships. We needed to up the appropriation in the scholarship line item to pay for those. I'm still not quite sure what the source of the revenue is, but we have gotten a $1,215 grant from the state to do transitional special education work for students, I believe, going to the high school. It is in a fund that we did not appropriate any money for this year. So there's an appropriation for that, for the $1,200. And the third one is a reduction in the appropriation in the Auxiliary Services Fund, which is the money that passes through us to Granville Christian, because their allocation ended up lower than the estimated amounts that we'd done earlier in the year, because of enrollment declines at Granville Christian. And so it's just bringing the appropriation in line with their actual funding level that they're for the state.
Which doesn't have any budget impact necessarily on us, because that's all
It's
flow
straight-
through
It
anyway.
has no budget.
Pass through.
It actually has a small impact in that we get to keep 4% of the total for administering the whole thing. And so it does I mean, because their allocation is down, we get less money from the 4% fee, which we would be happy to give up in its entirety to the state to directly fund them, and I have expressed that to Mr. Ryan, and had that conversation with him that, we used to do Welsh Hills as well, and the state budget last year actually directly funded Welsh Hills because they are a non-religiously affiliated group. I suggested to Mr. Ryan that we would happily give up the 4% for them to directly fund Granville Christian and let the state deal with being the religion police, which is essentially what I am forced to do, to make sure that they're not spending their money on things that they are not allowed to spend it on. I would rather the state enforce that rather than us having to enforce that. So with some luck, maybe that will get into the next budget and they can fund Granville Christian. We won't have to have this discussion anymore.
Keep trying.
Yeah.
And Mike, thank you for allocating that $1,000 award to a scholarship fund. That's very, very thoughtful and generous.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Ms. Dees? Ms. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Junius?
Aye. Do we have a motion?
Second.
Ms. Dees? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Junius?
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.
At CTEC, somebody always says no.